Hello, everybody. It's me again, John, your host for Arche Speaks, which is kind of the name that we wanted to start. We wanted to see if you liked. Let us know if you like it. If you don't, give us another suggestion. We're all ears. Today, we're going to be tackling the idea of self-image. And with us today is somebody that you might be pretty familiar with. He's a regular on this podcast. It's Pastor Pete. As always, he's probably one of the people with a very eccentric fashion. He kind of stands out there, and I think he was a really good person to give us a good perspective on what self-image should be. How should we approach it, especially in this fast-paced and social media-driven society? So how are you doing today, Pastor?
Doing well, thank you. Thank you for having me here, although it's at my house.
Yeah.
So, but you know.
Of this. Oh my gosh. This guy. He's so ready to say that. So ready. But thank you for the venue. This is very common.
But I'm good. Thank you for having me. It's always fun to have these conversations and to have them, even though it's not with as many people, but to be able to have a conversation that people can listen in on is good.
Yeah.
So.
And that's what this podcast is all about. So let's start right away with Pastor Pete. How would you define self-image in a way that's very clear cut for us?
I think classically self-image is something that we understand in terms of how we view ourselves. Yeah. But on some level, I feel like that's not really what it is, because if it was indeed that, then in my opinion, people really probably wouldn't have an issue with self-image at all.
Not really care.
Right. If it's just you thinking about what it is that you are and has no one else's opinion matters in it, if it's indeed completely self-image, then why does it matter? Like, everyone should be very happy with their self-image. We shouldn't have any self-image issues, so on and so forth. So I think in that way, it's really not self-image that we're talking about. It's the way that other people think about us and then how we interact with that opinion, right? Our opinion or our feelings and or our approval of other people's approval of us. And so, if your parents like it or if other people like it or your coworkers or whoever, your friends and whatnot, then that's kind of how we judge. Particularly in today's day and age, I think that's what self-image is all about. And even from the very beginning, if we're really just understanding even Adam and Eve's story, self-image wasn't really about self-image. It's always about this contained relational thing, right? How we viewed each other. And then, of course, when sin enters into the world, then all of a sudden, it kind of gets skewed. So I think, understanding self-image like that, I think is an interesting proposition. But when you understand it that way, then I think it changes the conversation. That's kind of what I'm hoping that we're able to do a little bit more, is that self-image isn't contained within this thing that's just ourselves, but it's a much larger conversation.
Yeah, where it really does involve the people that are close to us. Their opinion does matter. Like you mentioned, parents, friends. And so I think this is a great transition into what I kind of talked about in the intro about the social media driven society that we live in. Everyone's got a smartphone, everyone's got access to Wi-Fi, everyone's got the Instagram, the Facebook, the Twitter, the whatever. And I wanted to ask you then, how do you think these apps for entertainment affect us when it comes to this deeper understanding of self-image?
Oh, I mean, it's everywhere. It's everything, and particularly today's, like, even if you're a sports fan, some of the stuff that's happened in the recent past. Like, people have burner accounts, and now Finsta is a big thing. If you don't know what that is, it's just like fake Instagram accounts that you and only your friends share. So you have like the real fitness. It's really funny because it's kind of an oxymoron. Finsta, which is supposed to be fake Instagram, it's where you post the real stuff, like your real you, without having to hide anything, to your real friends who like accept you for who you are. Yeah. And then your real Instagram is the stuff that you post and it's kind of marked up or augmented or edited or whatever for everyone else to see, people who don't really know you. So it's kind of this interesting idea, but it's kind of everywhere, and it really hyper drives this understanding of our self-image and what we think about ourselves. And so no, it's a completely different era than even I grew up in. And again, I'm 35, so depending on who you are, maybe a little old, but I'm not really all that old. I went to college and, social media had just kind of started. YouTube and Facebook had kind of started. And so even in my day, back in those days, self-image has always been a problem, but it wasn't as big of a thing, I think, as it is now, because we just don't have the constant, almost nauseating, nonstop like comparison thing that we have with everybody else, and what we do and what we say are judged by everybody. Like again, as a sports fan or even just anyone in entertainment knows what it's like, right, to have a Twitter. And a lot of times you'll hear celebrities or anybody talking about kind of off-season time or when they're kind of not in the limelight and doing their thing. One of the first things that they do is they shut off all their social media. They stop checking their mentions and whatnot. It's because that's what drives it. And again, so then if you it really kind of continually supports this idea and perpetuates this idea that self-image isn't really a self thing. It's a completely kind of outward and dictated by others type of thing, which is very interesting, right? Because then for me, self-image would be great because if it's indeed a self thing, then it's in your control, right? I can control my self-image and I can dictate my self-image and so on and so forth. But self-image is not that. And again, a healthy self-image, in my opinion, isn't where I get to control everything and I get to do me, because that's not the way it's been designed by God, in my opinion. But it's like whose attention or whose opinion matters to you, I think, is really the important questions with self-image, right? Yeah. Whose image or opinions of your image is it really important that you're understanding? And with Twitter and just again social media, that's the thing. It's expanded this ability for people to chime in or have an opinion about you, and that's kind of what makes this world a very different world than the one that I grew up in, because we were always kind of insulated to the people that like literally it's like physical, like people you physically went to school with. If you went to a big school, maybe that's big, or the people you worked with or whatever. But now it's like people from all corners of the world can have a say, quote unquote, on who you are, right? And then, and so it's kind of this interesting, I think, world that we live in.
Yeah,
so.
The world's gotten a lot smaller with this increase of social media consumption. And so I was, wanted to build off of that and ask you, is there a healthy, positive way for us as, consumers, as people that live in this world to live with social media, with the entertainment apps? How would you approach that?
So I think social media is this interesting thing. So particularly now it's like Instagram, but for the older generation, it's Facebook, which is crazy. Yeah. The fact that Facebook is for older generation, but it's really interesting because I know people. So I used to be, I guess, much more active on social media. And if you look at my thing now, I really just use it. This may sound kind of weird, but I just really use it to consume it, to check in really on the church people and like others. But I have a lot of friends, pastor friends, who I really highly respect, and they use it quite a bit. And so if you look at what they do, it really is a social platform for them to engage in other people, but also I think you'll find it, and they really like to proclaim things, like proclaim the good news of Christ or whatever the case might be. Yeah. And so they're not really consuming it more than they're using it as a platform to proclaim. Yeah. And I don't think, and because of the lives that they live, not very many people have a lot of negative things to say about them. But I think in terms of how do we handle it, it really is, if it really is indeed a way to connect, then I think that's good. But oftentimes that's not what I find it is. Yeah. It's really a way to kind of bring people down. It's a way to kind of measure up. It's a way to compare yourself to a certain person.
Portray kind of this false image of who you are.
Right. But even more so than that, it's like you do it to compare to somebody else, right? I always like to say to some of my students or anyone, I always go, when's the last time you had a real original idea? When's the last time you put on something or you wore something or you did some sort of makeup or whatever it is that you do? When's the last time that was actually original to you? Right? So like, whatever. So in this case, I was like, when was the last time the way you looked and presented yourself, when was the last time that was John O? Complete, straight up, right? Rather than this person influenced this and so on and so forth. So I think over the years, I've kind of gotten to a place where a lot of, I think, what I am is indeed fairly original to who I am now. I will, if I pick up on a trend that I like, I generally just kind of stick with it because I like it. I think, my hair or my facial hair, whatever the case might be, I think that's kind of what it is. And so it's this interesting place. I think if you really use it as a way to connect with people, then I think it can really be healthy on some level. But I think most of the time it's not that. So then it really then goes into this negative. Again, I mentioned this in one of my sermons recently, but I watched an Instagram Netflix documentary. It's fascinating on so many levels, but I find that like there's a guy who takes like secret photography in like Brooklyn, but so in the beginning it was really this cool place of like where he just got to like project his artwork. And then all of a sudden it was really funny, like he then like sold out. I think something about like, I think so like the long story was he used to take crazy shots of like New York City from like on top of bridges or whatever. So it's kind of like this, underground kind of
trendy,
right, movement. But he wasn't really supposed to do it because you're not supposed to climb bridges and all that kind of stuff. And then one day, I think something along the lines of somebody put like a white flagpole on like one of the bridges, and everyone thought that he did it because he was like kind of known, even in the underground circles, that's like the preemptive, like, bridge photographer of New York City. And then he was getting a lot of flack for it, and he was getting a lot of heat. And so he took a interview with like some news reporter, and apparently he just basically said, no, it's not me, yada, 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 it's other people, and there are a lot of people that are doing it. And then the entire kind of like underground, like, community of like bridge photographers or whatever, they all got really mad, and then they started like threatening him and all that kind of stuff. It's like, oh, you're a sellout, blah blah, all this kind of stuff. And so again, it's like if it's this idea, if this is a place where you can really express yourself and connect, then that's really cool. But then once you it turns a little bit, then it really becomes an interesting understanding. So I think not to linger too much on the social media aspect of things, but this understanding of self-image and how we can consume it. If you can consume it without having to feel like those are the things and those are the people and those are the ways that you compare yourself to, then I think it's healthy. But I think we have to question how readily possible is that? Like, how is that indeed a possibility for the vast majority of us, right?
It's a very narrow line between like using it as an avenue to connect with people that you may not see on a daily basis, but then on the other side, it's really looking at it and being like, oh yeah, this person has this is their family, man, that all these likes. I'm guilty of that. I'm guilty of going to Instagram or Facebook and checking how many likes that I have and who liked it and when they liked it and stuff. And so talking more about, we defined self-image as how is really centered on our opinion is really driven by other people. So then in order to combat that, to tackle it biblically, how do we do that with negative self-image in any form of fashion? I think particularly social media is a big part of it, but it's not the only way.
Right.
Only like staged where negative self-image is pronounced. How do we do that biblically?
Interestingly, and in my opinion, this may be counterintuitive for some people. It's actually not, I think, what a lot of other people prescribe. I think a lot of people would prescribe it as like a self-help thing, like look inside yourself, really figure out who you are, so on and so forth.
Gotta love yourself.
Right. I was listening to another podcast, actually. It's a really fascinating one. I forget exactly who it was, but he was talking about, they were talking about like, God and like homosexuality and some of this other stuff. And long story short, basically he said, I think we live in a world where everyone says you have to look deep inside yourself to find like who your true self is. Right. Mm-hmm. But he said, when you look deep inside your heart, all you're going to find is sin and brokenness. The answer isn't found within you. The answer is found from out, right? And that source of an interest, the source of approval. And so for us, obviously, that's Christ. And the best way for me to explain it is actually through my oldest son, Mason. So Mason is 8, and thought-wise, he thinks like me, but his personality is just like his mom's. And so, in many ways in the beginning, he's very self-conscious and things of that nature. And like this is a kid at 2 years old, he like would not get on a stage and he would not present himself in front of people.
He wouldn't even greet guests at the house because he was so shy.
Exactly. It's like he just was so kind of, in that place. And now as an 8-year-old, it's really interesting. Like, we were at a wedding the other day and he's got, interesting hair, I guess. And he has a very interesting sense of hairstyle. He just does, I just cut his hair however he wants it to, and then his aunt, his momo, like she curled his hair one day to like make it like a pomade, and he loved it. And so I was actually very surprised. I was like, Mason would never do that. And then, I think we asked him, like, do you like it? And he's like, yeah. And he's like, well, like, why? He's like, I like being different. It's okay, right? Or, he's got like his head, his sides and his back are kind of like shaved, kind of pretty clean. But then his top is pretty long. His mom hates it, but it's just pretty long. And then he'll tie it up, kind of almost like a fountain on top. And you'll go to school like that, and he'll play soccer games like that, and he just doesn't care. So it's like it's really interesting. So then I started thinking about like, how is this kid like that? Because that's not who he is in comparison to his brother and sister. His brother and sister are way more like ostentatious. They're out there. They'll be flamboyant or whatever. But Mason is not like that in any way, shape, or form. And so we've understood like how is it that way? And I think one of the big things is that we've never said anything about what he looks like. I tell this story all the time too, but when I think Mason was like 1 or however, I went into his room and his mom was there, Christina was there, and then she was like shaping up his nose. There's a Korean thing, for those of you who don't know, where you kind of like take a child and you kind of like start to like pinch the bridge of their nose, right? And the reason why you're doing it when they're young is their bones and all sorts of stuff are malleable enough where you can kind of shape it, because Asians stereotypically we have a very flat nose, and apparently that's not appealing or whatever. And so I walked in and she was doing it. And that's just a thing that Korean people have done forever and ever because we thought it was good. And I remember I walked in, I said, "What are are you doing to my son? And I use those words very, purposely, right? Because I wanted to get her attention. And she's like, what? And I was like, what are you doing? And she's like, I'm shaping his nose. And I was like, for what? And I remember I went very strong at it. And I said, what? Because of the way that he's been made by God isn't good enough. And then she was very taken aback by that. And I said, where do you think people learn that they're not good enough, or they're not beautiful enough, or they're not handsome enough, or they're not whatever enough? It starts right here. Though he may not know it now, you will later indeed show him and teach him that who he is and how he's been made is not good enough. So we have a rule in our house. Even though it may not fit our personal whatevers, I let the kids do their hair however they want, as long as it's appropriate. But I don't understand how a hairstyle can be inappropriate. But like the way that they look and the way that they present themselves, we let them do whatever it is that they want, as long as it's appropriate, right? So then sometimes, the kids will go to school and they will not match their colors. And for Christina, she's very monochrome and very much a lot of things that she does. She's classically not all that. She wears a lot of colors now because I've kind of almost forced her to. I buy her clothes for her, and sometimes I'll buy her colorful clothes. But she'll be like, oh, that doesn't match. And I'll be like, and what's your point? And she's like, well, then don't you want them to look? And I was like, what's wrong with the way that they look? Yeah. Right. And then, and I think the response to that, people might be like, well, what if they get me fun of? And I was like, well, at this age, they probably won't. But even if they do, you're really doubly attacking, saying like, what you want isn't good enough. And then if they get made fun of that too, then it's like this doubly worse type of thing. And so we've tried to instill within them that we love them for who they are. When Kara was born, obviously, as I keep talking about my wife, but when Kara was born, that's one thing that my wife really was concerned about, was like, how, as a girl, how is she going to handle that? And I remember from the very beginning, I would, she learns these things in school and around her. It's just all over the place. She'll come home and she'll be like, Dad, Appa, like, is this beautiful? And she'll put on a dress or whatever and say, is this beautiful? And I always look at her like, you're beautiful, baby, no matter what, because God has made you beautiful. No clothes or whatever makes you beautiful. You in and of itself, you by yourself and the way that you're made is beautiful. So long story short, like kind of coming back to the original question, the way you combat it, I think, is within a community, within people and relationships that indeed love you for who you are, that understand and appreciate your quote unquote self-image for what it is, right? People that will see you at your highest and at your lowest, at your quote unquote prettiest or most handsome and at quote unquote your ugliest, and say what you are and who you are and what you look, and my love for you has nothing to do with how you look and how you present yourself. It's all about who you are and the relationship that we have. And then in that place, I think that's where you're allowed to able to say to one another, like, hey, this is who you are. So, people have commented about, how I dress, or, like how I can do whatever. How can you wear pink pants? I wear white pants one time. Like, I think on Easter I wore white pants and like this kind of like soft blue, like blazer or whatever. People are like, oh, how can you, like, I can't pull that off. And I jokingly, but not jokingly, I said, you can do whatever you want, man. Right? Like, as long as you like it, like, what's the point? Like, you can do whatever you want. Like, why would you let anybody, like, no, I can't do that. It's like, what does that mean? I can't do that. I can't pull that off. It doesn't quite like make sense to me, right? Because to me, to say you can't pull it off means that you can't literally put on pants that are white. Like, and obviously that's not, that's a stupid thing to say. So it's kind of this idea, I think, in these relationships that we have, if we're able to really understand who we are in our goodness and in our badness, then I think our understanding of self-image changes. And of course, it all goes back to the gospel, right? If Christ will love us, and indeed does love us, and will continue to love us, even though we present ourselves to him in all of our glory sometimes, and of course in all of our shame, and he's the one who approves of us in that way because he can, and he loves us the way that he does, then that's the foundation for how we tackle this self-image. And even then, taking the conversation a step further, and I think if you ask my wife or even my kids, again, this may be countercultural, but whenever my kids do not do well, or whenever my wife does not do well, maybe again, against culture, I will blatantly and almost flagrantly sometimes point out that they're very ugly in this very moment. Because for me, the reason is because that's a way of saying, though you are really ugly in almost everything that you're doing, and therefore you're ugly in your actions and you're ugly in the way that you look and everything, I love you. It doesn't change my approval of you, right? And I think that's driven a lot of the conversations in our home. I think that's why Mason can be who he is, because we've seen some dark times from him. We've seen some pretty selfish times. We've seen quote unquote ugly times from him. and our love for him hasn't changed. And so I think that approval from his own family and from the people that he loves, that I think has allowed this shy, kind of introverted, like, self-conscious kid to kind of blossom into this 8-year-old who kind of really doesn't care what you think, right? And will just kind of do what he wants to do. And so I think that's really the trick. So again, not looking inward, which is what I think our society will tell you, but really being able to look outward in a way and say, well, what do the people who really care for me think of me? And really to be able to focus on that, and to not focus on so much on the people that really don't matter in this case, right? People who don't know you well enough to be able to say anything about you. Why do we give them so much credence versus the people who really love us and not give them any, kind of a thing? So I think it's been interesting, but I think that's kind of how you combat it, right? The more you are loved and accepted and approved within a loving community, I think that gives you the best chance in those relationships and within that community to, combat the self-image issue that we have in our culture, in our nation. So
yeah, I don't think that, I think that covered all bases. I think the big takeaway here is relationships really do matter when it comes to how we perceive ourselves. And yeah, the right ones the right relationships will really shape us to be the people that are living in freedom, that are living in love, in God's arms, within a godly relationship. Building off of that illustration, not illustration, but so that instance with Mason, and the Korean tradition of trying to build that, the bridge of their nose. I think a lot of today's society has been inundated. It's been overwhelmed with Korean entertainment, right? You turn on the radio, you hear a song from BTS or Blackpink or these famous Korean entertainment groups, music groups. And I think us as Arche being predominantly of Korean descent, I wanted to see if you had a good perspective on like this wave of consuming Korean entertainment, whether it be the fashion, the cosmetics, even the plastic surgery. I think that is rampant among these entertainers. How would you approach that?
I think in a similar approach, right? I think art is beautiful. Music is beautiful. I think we have a appreciation for aesthetics and beauty. So I don't think we're not trying to crush that spirit by any means, shape, or form. But again, it's this idea and this understanding, right? It's really actually, it's interesting because I think, again, I'm not a big K-pop person, but I've had to kind of study BTS only because it's like they're, such a thing.
And they're popular.
Right. Yeah. And so their last album,
Love Yourself,
it's called Love Yourself. Yeah. It's this idea and it's this ode to this ability to be able to love who you are, right? And like appreciate who you are, to drive this self-love. Again, I don't think they're not trying to be wrong on purpose. I think it's just kind of the wrong way of going about it, because unfortunately for them, in their spotlight, the way that they do, it draws attention onto who they are. And so I think you can consume any of these things in a healthy manner, as long as we're not trying to compare ourselves to these things, and then also in these people and these these ideas, and really just appreciating the art for who they are, right? And so I think that's kind of I think where we're at. But it's this interesting culture, because even like we I don't know if you've seen this on YouTube, but like whenever like a video shows up, if you kind of scroll through the comments, we'll be like, oh, who was here before a million, right? It's kind of like you're the real fans, that kind of a thing. And so right. So this type of, I think, in kind of interaction with it, I think is where it kind of can become a little dangerous. But if you love the art and if you really love the music, then I think it's good. So the way I kind of look at it is, if you can shut the lights down for music anyway, BTS or anything for me, if you can shut the lights down, turn off the lights, close your eyes, right, and just listen to the music and appreciate it, and you love it just as much when you're watching it, then does it make sense? And do you love it, right? I think that to me is the key, right? And so I think for me, that's what it is. If you can appreciate it, then the dancing and all the other stuff really adds on to the original, right? And the music. And so actually in the same podcast, I was talking about the guy, again, when he said you can look into your heart and find it, he uses very instant analogy about how life doesn't make sense without Jesus. And he uses an interesting analogy. He said a friend of his, I hope I get this right, but his friend of his, he walked into his friend's office or something like that. And he said, dancing without the music is mad. It's like maddening. Basically, I butchered that quote. Hopefully I can look it up again or find it. But basically the idea is, if you watch a bunch of people dancing, like on a BTS video or anything,
Yeah.
or Blackpink or whatever, and you don't have any music, it just looks like insanity.
Kind of weird, yeah.
Right. But then the moment you turn the music on, it all makes sense. So dancing, to those who can't hear the music, is just insanity. But if you can hear the music, then it all kind of makes sense. And so kind of in this understanding of self-image, again, and going back to, you know, all of this, it's like, I think that's really what it is. You can appreciate and love art, and there's nothing wrong with that. But at the same time, if what you're appreciating or focusing on isn't really the art or the music in and of itself, but really kind of all the other stuff that comes along with it, then I think that's where it can become a little dangerous.
Yeah.
And then also sometimes it's like, you know, that's why they challenge to be able to just listen to the music without any of the videos. You know, like for instance, like, could you love them without knowing what they look like? It's kind of like the idea, you know, the artist Sia, like you can't see what she looks like, right? You know, because she's covered from eye up, and all you really see is like, you know, she's wearing the same wig all the time. And so that's kind of the idea. It's like, can you appreciate my music even though,
For the sake of art.
right, for the sake of art, and just
Appreciating
really
art.
appreciating the art and then the beauty of it. And so I think that's kind of this idea. So I think there are definitely ways. I don't want to be the person who says like, you know, all those things are bad, because I don't think they are. But though I think the way that our culture consumes it sometimes can indeed be dangerous for many. And then of course it kind of drives all this other stuff like, oh, I'm not pretty enough, I'm not good enough to be whatever. You know, and you have, you know, whatever fandom crushes or whatever. But you know, so it can get kind of, you can diverge from I think what it's meant to
Very
be
easily.
Right. So
yeah, I think I would say the majority of us, if put in that situation, tend to diverge into this darker space of like, man, I'm not pretty enough, or I'm not cool enough, I'm not like, you know, like I'm not like these people, and just really like usually just dive into this ugly mess of negative thoughts, and I don't think that's the way that we should do it. So we'll split this up for a second for our, you know, for the sake of our audience. Then how do we approach, or is there a different approach that we take with self-image, for example, with the ladies, the females, our sisters out there, as opposed to, you know, the dudes, the guys? Is there a different approach? Should we have a different approach, or should it still be the same?
I would probably say, because of the culture we live in, particularly with like sex trafficking and some of the other stuff, definitely I think there's got to be a little bit of nuance in terms of how you approach it. But I think overall, I think we can say that, yeah, the way that we approach it, I think is still really the same. It's the beauty of like, this is why, you know, marriage is beautiful on so many levels. I always like to say this, and this is going to come off as super cheesy, but it's true. I actually didn't really think Christina was all that beautiful on our wedding day, because she had so much makeup on, and she's a person that doesn't wear very much makeup on a normal basis, that I could barely recognize her. I'm being dead honest. I couldn't really be like, look at her and appreciate her for the kind of, you know, for the person that I knew. And so I've said this to her, and you can ask her if you don't believe me. I said the day you were the least beautiful in my eyes was on the wedding day, because I just didn't recognize you for who you were.
Wow.
I don't tell her how she should look. I never do. I don't tell her how she should do her hair. I don't tell her how she should dress, other than be appropriate and all that kind of stuff. Outside of that, I really don't dictate anything about the way that she looks. But the one thing that I've asked is that, can you please not wear too much makeup? Because then you're just, in my opinion, for her, as her husband, as someone who loves her, I didn't want her to be covered up in other things. I said, I love you for who you are, first and foremost, and you are beautiful as God has made you. So there's just really not a whole lot of need for all those other things. And so, I think in that way it's nuanced a little bit differently for females, because, you know, dudes don't really wear makeup a whole lot, right?
Yeah.
So
we never know. It's just a trend. Yeah.
But we don't have as many ways to kind of this is gonna come off as whatever, but kind of masking ourselves or kind of enhancing our looks via, you know, cosmetics and stuff. And so I think that might be one nuance. But I think most importantly, it's still this understanding that God has made you in his image, which means we are the crown jewels of his creation, which means we are beautiful in and of ourselves in the way that we were made. Our sin makes us quite ugly, and there's nothing that you can, you know, do to cover up for sin or to make it look any prettier. It's just nasty. But we made in God's image, we are the crown jewels of his creation, and we're the masterpieces, right? As Ephesians says. And so in that way, to appreciate and understand that, I think is really the nuance that you go. Because, if you look in the world, there are people who are tall, there are people who are short, there are people who are whatever, different features, and everybody's uniquely made by God. And there's a purpose and a reason, and also just, his design, his craftsmanship, if you want to call it that. And so I think in that way, I think you can, maybe nuance it a little bit, of course, but I think at the heart of it is, again, it's not looking inside of yourself, looking in the mirror and be like, I'm beautiful today. No. You are beautiful because God tells you you're beautiful.
Exactly.
Yep. Right? Like that's the key, right? You're not beautiful because one day you'll tell yourself you're beautiful, because one day you'll feel beautiful maybe, but another day you won't, right? But also, no matter what you do to your body, whether it's get in shape or whatever, there are certain things about your body that you simply cannot change outside of like plastic surgery or whatever. But even then, there's certain limitations. Like that's what I find interesting about plastic surgery. There's limitations to plastic surgery too. Like you can't take a 5'5" person and make them 6'5". Like, where their body's functioning the way that a normal body's supposed to function. So there's limitations to what we can do. So understanding that we are loved and created in God's image as the crown jewels of his creation, meant to be this effervescent beauty that kind of images who he is. I think it's the way that you start. And then, of course, as you go, then you nuance it into kind of, who we're made as male and female. And I think that's kind of how you go. But as it pertains to self-image, I think it really is a fairly common conversation between the two, saying, we are who we are. And God has made us a certain way, right? And I've learned that through my kids. My kids, and most people, same parents, 3 really different kids.
Yeah, personality.
Like I can't. Yeah,
everything.
Like I can't wait till they grow up. Only because then you'll be able to see, like, how tall is Mason going to be versus how tall is Connor going to be. One is not any better than the other. And then, like, how is Kara going to be? But even now at 8, 6, and 4, you can see their personalities shine in so many different ways. They're so different, the 3 of them. And they look so different, the 3 of them. I don't know what it is, but I don't really think they look alike very much at all. Connor and Kara maybe, but, like, Mason, like, I don't know. I mean, them as siblings because they look like it, but I don't know. I know siblings that look like siblings. In my opinion, they don't really look like siblings to me. And maybe it's just, that's just my bias. But so even in that, you realize that God has, imaged us, and God has, created us and made us kind of how we're supposed to be. So I think that's really where the conversation starts. And so no matter male or female, we're made in the image of God. And so you start there, and then you build from that, and you say, God, you're loved by him. Right. And then again, that's why I tell Kara, God has made you beautiful. So nothing you put on or nothing nothing accentuates that to that degree. You are beautiful. Yes, the dress or whatever the dress in and of itself can be beautiful, but that doesn't accentuate your beauty in any way, because
exactly.
Right. Like I was harking back to when we were first made, we didn't have clothes. We didn't need it. The way that we were made, that's the tip-top form. That's the tip-top form. Right. And so, but that got skewed once sin entered the picture. And so I think, we kind of start there. And so, and again, and even in the garden, when they both ate of the fruit, both of them hid and both of them covered themselves. Right. And so, at the heart of it, I think, there's a very common conversation that we can have as both male and female, but there are in our culture today a very nuanced ways of doing it. But I think, you can approach it from the start. You can approach it kind of from the same place.
Yeah, I think, the slight nuance is important. I think just if we were to be a little bit more specific, the self-image for our ladies out there as opposed to how self-image is portrayed for the males out there, it's a little different. But I think overall, like what you were saying is God gives us our beauty. God gives us that worth. And we talked about self-image, but I think self-worth is part of that.
Right.
And I think the answer is still the same. Like the self-worth is not defined by how many likes you get or who are you loved, but ultimately who God says you are. That he is the person that has the authority, the only authority to define who you are and the beauty that you have, because he created you in his image. So we're going to take a little bit of a maybe
before we go, I think the one thing that I have to mention, so that we're kind of trying to be as complete or as fully to the extent that we can.
Please go ahead.
It's not to say obviously that women don't have, that there's different standards for men and women in the world in terms of beauty, and self-image and all that kind of stuff. Oh, there are for sure different standards, right? Women have been unfortunately objectified way more than men have
for a lot longer.
Right. So we definitely want to say that is definitely true. But I think at the core of it, the way that you combat it and the way that you would go at it, for me, if I was counseling, either or, I would start from the same place. Right. And I would start from the same place of we were made by God. in his image. Regardless of whether you're male or female, we're made in his image, and there's a beauty in and of itself, right? There's a beauty in that, and then you start that conversation, and I think then you kind of start to go in a specific route as you go to the individual person. But I think to each individual person, it'll change, whether it's female or male. Like to that person, the conversation is a little bit different, right? And how they grew up, and where they got their approval from, what their history is, what their relational history is, and so on and so forth. There's a whole slew of things that you have to consider. So, but if we're talking about it generally speaking, then I think you can really start at the same place and then really start to kind of build up from there. So
yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for that clarification. The little different perspective that I wanted to bring up was, okay, well then, if self-image is really dictated by by other people's approval, then should we just not care at all? Probably one of the more awesome things about our case, because we're intergenerational, you'll go out on any given Sunday, and sixth graders all the way up to adults, we have very different taste in fashion, very different ways that we portray ourselves to other people. So if it's not really driven by, if our opinion shouldn't be motivated or by like just the people around us or whatever, that's the general population, people that don't really care about us, then should we just not care at all? Should I just wear whatever I want? How do you approach that? Because I think you and I both agree that that's more of an extreme. That's something that we should avoid. So.
Right. Well, one thing you can't say is you can't just not care at all, right? To be indifferent to it all, because then that gets into this very interesting space of like, though I wear, I guess, what I want to wear. Well, again, our house rule is as long as it's appropriate, then we're okay, right? So you need to say that because both male and female, but in this particular situation, especially for females, like, the way that you present yourself definitely can be, there's a whole lot to it. But even guys, like, I know we joke, maybe I'll joke, but you shouldn't be showing up like shirtless or whatever. Like, you should all look appropriate and, have the appropriate dress. And so if you take that, I don't care what anyone says and I can just do whatever I want to the full extent, and that's where you'll go. People, kind of that kind of sort of thing. But on the other hand, what you wear and how you present yourself isn't really a dictating factor of who you are, right? Like one of the things about Korean churches is, everyone kind of knows this, going back to the culture piece a little bit. Whenever you see somebody, for the first time in a long time, they always go like, oh, like you gained weight, or oh, you look good, or you look healthy, you lost weight, so on and so forth. That's kind of the way it is. Or, when the first thing that they'll say, like, for instance, whenever I have a beard, that's literally the first thing that most people will comment on is my beard, right? So on and so forth. Or our wonderful producer, Chris, and his flowing hair, like, that's the first thing that people comment on, so on and so forth. So,
I thought you were a girl.
Right.
Again.
So, like, that's kind of that's the culture that we live in. And so, so then the other opposite is that we care too much about the way that we look, to the point where, like, if someone came in with shabby clothing that we didn't know, we would automatically assume a lot of different things depending on the person that you are, right? So you can't, you can't not care at all, and you can't care too much. There's kind of a middle ground, and I think the middle ground is really, and this has been my stance, and I don't know if people like it or not, but this is really what it is I always say, I don't care about what you think, but I really deeply care about what God thinks. And so the reason why I say that is because if God is the God that I know, and he is loving and gracious and mindful, and he's mindful of every single person, and he's loving of every single person, then his approval should meet the approval of all the human beings. Or a different way to put it is, if he approves of me in the things that I do and say in this particular situation context, the way that I look and present myself, then that should not be offensive or hurtful to a person with kind of the right mindset and the understanding of the world. Does that make sense? Right? So in that way, I think that's why I say, that about myself, right? Or that's the way that I carry myself, right?
Yeah.
Like, or in other ways, your opinion is not greater or of a more importance than God's opinion. And if God says, I approve, well done, my son, then everyone else's opinion doesn't really matter to me because, God's the one that stirs the drink, if you want to use that analogy, right? So in that way, I think that's kind of the middle ground. To kind of divulge into a bit of a self-story, I think people know, and you and I think share similar. People may not know about this, but in college, I was pretty heavy. I was kind of chunky and chubby my entire life, right? I also, I'm tall. I'm almost 6'2", 6'1", somewhere in there, but I wasn't tall for most of my life. I was 5'5" going into my sophomore year as a 16-year-old. I turned 16 in September of my sophomore year. So I was 5'5" at 16. And I grew 5 inches from January to, I think, June of like my sophomore year. So from 5'5" to 5'10". So like my whole life changed in that kind of a way. But I was always kind of chunky, kind of chubby, and I have pictures to prove it. And then in college, I got really, really heavy. Like I maxed out, at least the heaviest I ever weighed myself was at 235. And right now I'm at 180, 185, depending on, how much I've eaten the day before, whatever. I used to care a lot about what people thought, like a lot. And I expressed it in such a way through fashion and through different things, but I really did care a lot. And then it wasn't even because I lost a lot of the weight, which I eventually did, but it really coincided with when God really took a hold of my life and I really understood that he loved me for who I am. And then it really wasn't about kind of, impressing other people. Actually, the moment I really did follow and received salvation, I became who I am. My sense of style got crazier. People think I have crazy hair or a crazy beard now. Like, it was insane back in college and during those days. But up until then, it was pretty like I fit a mold. I used to think I was a thug. So I used to wear like, the big jerseys, and I used to color coordinate everything, headbands and the big tees with like all the kicks and all that kind of stuff. That was kind of my thing. But I went from that all of a sudden. I just kind of went to this like, kind of a wacko hairstyle. Like one time I grew out a fro, like as big of, like I had a mini fro for a little while just because I felt like it. And then I used to have like this like Super Saiyan type of hair where like, just kind of all over the place. And in that space, I started realizing I like to express myself through different, avenues. But it really changed because all of a sudden I realized I've lived my life based on the opinions of all these other people, including my parents and people that I cared, and they always somehow let me down. And they always somehow expressed to me, in different ways that they didn't love me exactly for who I was at all the moments. Their love waned and differed based upon whatever, my looks, my performance, my accomplishments, my success, or so on and so forth. And God was the only one that actually loved me for who I am. And actually, when he loved me, I was at my darkest. I went through my first year of college. I went to like every prayer meeting. I went to like everything. I spent more time in church. I spent, my full-time job was at church as a first year in college and not studies. Wow. And my grades reflected that. And I gave up on the faith after that year. And so my second year in college, it was the nastiest year of my life. It was really bad. And at that point, when I was really literally like, 2 seconds away from giving up on God altogether and, final nail in the coffin type of thing, that's when he really took a hold of my life and really showed me, I love you for who you are. And so from that moment, it really changed. And so from that moment, for me, that's really when I realized, like other people's opinions of me really do not matter. What matters most is essential is God's opinion. And if God's opinion of me, I believe, is good, or he approves of me, then I don't really have to concern myself with other people's opinions because I think I'm going to be in a good place anyway, right? Like that's kind of the buffer, and I don't have to worry about what everyone else thinks. Not to say I don't care about you or care about other people. Obviously, I do care, but it's not the thing that's driving my decision making. Right. And so then I've gotten to this place as a married, as a father of 3 and all these other things. I kind of just wear what I want and do as I need to because I just that's just the way that I like to do it. I have a very interesting sense of fashion because I do. It's just kind of, I don't know, I think God has made me this way. And so having kind of saying all that, I think what we're getting at kind of at the end all be all in this discussion that we're having about self-image is if you don't understand that you are approved by a God who knows your greatest and deepest and most just nasty, and then you realize how much he loves you and that he still loves you and he hasn't given up on you and he hasn't said deuces, like peace, like I'm nothing with you and yet, then that's when your self-image will like radically change. You will no longer be driven by all those other things. So I think at the heart of it, maybe it's cliche, but the answer is the gospel, right? The answer is Christ's love. The answer is the cross. The answer is the resurrection. We were talking about it today in one of our teachers' meetings. I said, what does it mean that we live in light of the resurrection? Like, it should change everything about us. Everything about us. And so as we talk about self-image, I think that's the biggest thing is you can help people to feel a lot of different ways about themselves. You can help people to get healthier and so on and so forth and do all these things. But I think I always want to know what's driving this self-image issue.
What's the root?
Right.
What is at the base of this?
Right. what's the little button that I can push, if you want to look at it that way. And if you don't start to really tackle that, then it's really never going to be an issue.
Very, very temporary solution.
Because, I think you look at everybody and, every couple of years your life changes in some ways, right? So if we're talking about, women, maybe you were at your peak or whatever at a certain time, and then of course you get pregnant and your body does different things, and then afterwards you're whatever. So you have all these things, and then as you get old and your hair starts to change or whatever, your skin. So your physical appearance is this constantly changing thing all throughout the course of your life, right? And so you're never really going to get ahead of it or get in front of it in any way, shape, or form. And you're never going to be pleased or happy. So if that's the case, then I think we have to, point at something that's deeper and really look at something that's deeper, and really more than, again, not looking into yourself. It's really what God sees.
Yeah.
And his approval is really going to be the thing that really drives us. So self-image, to me, the key is not what I understand and what I feel about myself, but it's whose opinion of you matters. Whose opinion of you is driving, quote unquote, this image that you have, or this image that you want, or this image that you seek. And if the person that drives that self-image is indeed the Lord of Lords, right? Jesus Christ, then that changes the ballgame.
Yeah. You're in a good place.
Right.
Wow.
So,
I was not anticipating for us to be able to talk at this, at this length, but yeah, I think that pretty much wraps everything up. Thank you so much for being here and welcoming us into your house as you always do, Pastor. I mean, I like it.
It's not really welcoming. Let's just be real. Chris goes, can we record a podcast? And then the venue is my house, at my living or my kitchen table.
Usually as in all the time.
He could always find a different place, but he chooses not to, So I'm just saying, so. I mean, both of y'all basically live here, so that's kind of what it is. So, but I'm thankful for this. I'm really thankful for these podcasts only because I think it, again, allows us to have very real conversations. I think about things that matter, and so I'm excited about kind of the conversations that we will have going forward. Right, and then I think these conversations hopefully will spark newer ones, right? And so I'm thankful for you. I'm thankful for Chris. I think for anyone who's participating in this, I think it's adding it's definitely adding a new layer or a new flavor to the conversation, to our ministry. So I'm super thankful. And then of course we've got the audio genius behind us that makes us sound really great.
Really good.
Puts all this stuff together.
Edits all the mistakes. All the stuff that I make. But so all you guys that are listening, thank you so much. If you have any other suggestions of things that you'd like to talk about, you'd like for us to discuss here on this podcast, again, this is where we have good conversations. This is where Arche really gets to grow closer. Message us, email us at rkkcpch@gmail.com. Comment down below if you're on YouTube. Just let us know what we can do, and we love you guys. Bye.
See you later.